Welcome to today's episode of the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I have Jen Bruce back, who had so much expertise the last time sharing her story of recovering from alcohol use disorder with Ibogaine, and so much wisdom from that journey. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to have you back was, number one, addiction is such a huge problem today. It's not just alcohol and drugs, but so many suffer from addictive behaviors. And you've started this program that is an alternative health for, how would you put it?
They're holistic tools for people on the path of recovery. No matter how you got into recovery, plant medicine or not, it's a way that we can live our life, that we support our best health physically. But, for mental health, our brain is the organ for that, and our nervous system. And so really tuning into what we can do day to day with lifestyle and nutrition as medicine to help us heal.
Wow. So how did you develop this program? Did this come after you came out of treatment?
So I got sober the old-fashioned way in AA meetings, which was a challenge. But I was very fortunate with my sponsor. She had worked in the field for 35 years. She'd been sober for 50 years when I started working with her. And immediately she emphasized the importance of nutrition for relapse prevention. Specifically keeping my blood sugar balanced. And the blood sugar is what gives our brain energy. When our blood sugar drops too low, it releases adrenaline in the system and can create anxiety. That can lead to cravings and relapse. Can lead to not being able to handle our emotions, being very reactive. And I believe everybody that has had addiction issues is also rooted in trauma. So if we're healing from trauma, anything that's going to adrenalize the system is going to trigger us back into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so she gave me the foundational building blocks for using nutrition. And I used to come to her when I was having meltdowns in early recovery with a problem I didn't think I could handle. And she'd always ask me, "What did you eat for breakfast, Jen?" And always I would say nothing or coffee. And she says, "Go back and eat the way that I taught you, and come back in 3 days when your mind is clear, and then we can fix the problem." And 99% of the time, I didn't have to come back because the problem was I hadn't eaten breakfast.
Wow. It's kind of crazy because we know, there's that old adage, you are what you eat. And clearly these bodies are incredible temples, whether we're disassociating from them or being healthy in our habits. But that's pretty radical to think that you could change your diet and then this way of reacting changed. If you're getting somebody either ready for going into an Ibogaine treatment, or whether you're dealing with somebody or working with somebody after, are there different nutritional protocols before and after?
Yeah, the reality is if somebody's coming to Ibogaine, or any treatment for addiction for that matter, it's really not the ideal time to start upgrading the diet and lifestyle, because we have to get the drugs and the alcohol or the other addictive behavior out of the way first, because when we're in addiction, we literally don't have control. So is it ideal to clean up the diet and things before we go for treatment? Absolutely. But is it realistic a lot of the time? No. We're not hearing that yet. But the beautiful thing with Ibogaine, and what it taught me when I went through my Ibogaine flood 3 years sober, when I already knew quite a bit, it showed me how much of my suffering mentally and emotionally was coming from my physical body and the damage that it had done. And especially with alcohol, it kills our microbiome, which is 5 to 7 pounds of beneficial bacteria when healthy. And that's responsible for 95% of our serotonin, about 60 to 80% of our dopamine, which is very highly associated with addiction. Dopamine deficiency leaves you feeling like you're not getting a reward. Well, dopamine gives us a sense of reward, purpose, focus, and motivation in life, which is really important. And GABA, which is our natural Xanax, is also mostly produced and used in our gut. The gut-brain is connected. And so what I learned through my Ibogaine journey is that it healed up my gut. It rebalanced all the systems in my body, and it really fortified my body just as much. And it was almost like my mental health that came out of that was a result of the physical healing that it gave me on many levels. The nutrition part is really important after Ibogaine, because if we go home and, we may have quit doing the behavior, the drinking or the drugs, but usually we have a completely unhealthy lifestyle that goes with that. And so the Ibogaine regulates everything, and it will stay that way for a little while. But if we go home and we start eating junk food and we're keeping our body deprived of what it needs, and, stress and poor sleep, we're going to go back to where we were before. That reset isn't just a lifelong cure. We have to maintain that when we get home. And so that's why the nutrition and lifestyle piece is so important.
Now, at the Ibogaine clinic that you went to for your recovery after your 12-step program, did they incorporate any of the nutrition before you had left?
There wasn't any education on it, but we were eating whole foods. We were down in Mexico, and it was a very healthy whole foods diet. We were eating regular meal times, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We were eating mindfully without having screens on, and we were eating in community. There's so many elements to what food really does for us beyond just giving us calories or even nutrition. So that was, and a lot of retreats or centers we'll go to, that's one of the healing things that we may not realize is the regularity of the schedule, eating when we're supposed to, sleeping when we're supposed to, being around people, having meaningful conversations. That's all nutrition. Body, mind, and soul.
It's all the medicine. So when you came home and you left the Ibogaine clinic and you had this reset, was there any moment of trigger to go back to alcohol, or did the Ibogaine take it all away?
I was done drinking before I went to Ibogaine, honestly. But the triggers that would happen that brought me to Ibogaine was, and now I realize it was trauma, but, getting stuck in chronic fatigue, chronic pain, addiction to work, caffeine, sugar, and really kind of toxic situations, because that's what I had been used to my entire life. That was normal and comfortable and familiar to me. So, that, and yeah, when I got home, there were some triggers, and I wasn't really taught about that at Ibogaine, that there would be triggers that I would need to work through. So that's kind of where my own personal learning journey began, because I knew that what Ibogaine provided for me is that I knew that I didn't have to suffer anymore. I clearly got to feel wonderful, and it wasn't the medicine, it was me. And there's a way to maintain this. And so that's what inspired me to first learn all of this for myself and then work doing this professionally.
So for someone who's coming out of a 7-day Ibogaine treatment facility, which I think when you were there, I think you mentioned that your stay was 14 days? Yeah, so a lot of the clinics now have shortened it to 7 days. Do you have an opinion on the extra 7 days that you got, and whether you think that 7 days is enough?
Yeah. So the 14 days that I went in, and it was for psychospiritual, a massive one. It was for trauma and for work addiction. I needed every 14 of the days that I was there. I was not ready to go home 1 minute before the 14 days. And honestly, I could have stayed longer. But I had a daughter I needed to get home to. So my opinion on the 7 days is that it's simply not long enough. And there's a lot of reasons that they are 7 days. But, you're so raw after an Ibogaine treatment. And especially if we're coming from toxic households, or if we're coming from, relationship where there's still addiction present or there's abuse. Normally, if there's addiction, there's a lot of other problems present. And so to go home after 7 days, barely having your feet underneath you and getting thrown back into the real world can be pretty jarring.
So for somebody getting out of treatment now, whether that is to a traditional kind of 12-step program or Ibogaine, what would you suggest? So if someone called you and wanted to work with you, what are some of your greatest teachings that you learned in your own process?
So what I've learned along the way is that I am not an addict. I'm not an alcoholic, and it's an experience that I went through, and it doesn't have to define who I am. It's certainly not who I am. And when I can look at it that way, I can evolve out of it. It was really important for me to identify that at the beginning so I could work on the problem that was facing me, but then there was time to move past that at some point. if you're covered in diagnosis, like most of us are, bipolar, depression, anxiety, that's an opinion diagnosis, and that's from the Western medical model. It doesn't recognize our spirit and our soul. It doesn't recognize trauma in the nervous system, and that, you can step out of that into the holistic model and look through your condition as a trauma-informed situation. And I usually just say for people to look at everything that they've been through in their life. And if you can't identify anything in your own life, look at what your ancestors generationally have been through in your family. And 100% of the time people say, oh my gosh, and it's like there would be something wrong with you if you were okay after all of the things that you've been through, or your lineage has been through, and that you can heal. But you have to take the healing into your own hands, and your healing has to become a lifestyle. And don't limit yourself to one modality. I mean, definitely commit yourself to, if you're going to do 12-step, do it all the way. If you're going to do the Ibogaine process, do it all the way. But that doesn't mean that you can't do like 12-step or Ibogaine all the way and then also benefit from nourishing yourself with the proper foods and identifying if you have chronic illnesses underneath that, because not only does trauma result in addiction, but it results in things like autoimmune conditions, and Western doctors and rehab centers are not testing for these kinds of things. Get curious about where things are coming from and know that you can heal. And that genes are not our destiny. They're our tendency when we're under stress. So just because this runs in your family doesn't mean it can't stop with you. Our genes are influenced by our environment.
So let's say somebody finished with an Ibogaine treatment facility and isn't ready to go home. Is that part of the care that you do, an aftercare program?
I do that on an individual case-by-case basis, yes. And I coach many people virtually. I love it. Yeah. It's such a beautiful rebirth that you get to be present for, and just helping people have the container to unfurl in their own time and find their value and their self-love again, and teaching them the things they need to know to take care of themselves so that they can have their best life is like the greatest gift. Yeah.
What are some of the tools that you're offering? So let's start with nutrition. Besides eating 3 meals a day and being, eating healthy foods, are there also really important supplements that you're providing the information on and things like that?
Yeah, so that would be like the functional medicine realm of the work that I do. And yeah, so depending on where people are at, there's specific neurotransmitters that can use support depending on which addiction you've had. Like the specific micronutrient needs for somebody recovering from opiate addiction is going to be different than somebody recovering from alcohol, because it affects the brain and the body differently. Sometimes we even unpack genetic tests because there can be genetic issues. Most people with addiction tendencies have a gene that's associated with the hunter-gatherer. It's called the warrior gene, and we're actually designed to metabolize dopamine faster. And back in our natural state in hunter-gatherer setting, that would have made us a leader in our tribe, because it motivated us to be very good at hunting, gathering, protecting our community from potential danger, whatever that might be. And now in today's world, it doesn't serve us, and we get our dopamine hits in very unhealthy ways. So part of this is knowing how we're wired too, so that we can best support our genes. So there's, for all people recovering from addiction, having animal protein is vitally important, because the amino acids that build our neurotransmitters that I'm talking about are only bioavailable in animal protein. I was vegan for 10 years when I was in my addiction. I think it exacerbated it about 100 times. Having a lot of healthy fat, our brain needs fat, lots of fiber, keeping our blood sugar stable, and that protein is really going to nourish the reward center in the brain that's very affected by addiction. So, and it doesn't have to be anything complicated with the nutrition for addiction recovery, and supplementation can be very helpful, especially if you've gone through traditional treatment and they put you on a bunch of medications that you'd like to get off of. You can use micronutrient therapy, amino acid therapy to taper safely off of these medications if you are considering trying to access like plant medicines, for instance, like Ibogaine.
So what are you seeing being in the addiction recovery world, and you're seeing a lot of different addictions with different drugs and substances? What is the kind of effective rates of Ibogaine and 12-step? Are they around the same, or does Ibogaine have higher rates of recovery?
I'd say that the success rate is about the same across the board. I've spent ample time in the functional medicine, nutrition world, 12-step, the yoga community, and Ibogaine. And I'd say that the relapse rate is very high. I would say the quality of the outcome depends on, but it's hard to say with these modalities or these pathways which one's more effective, because there's more to consider than that, because a lot of, everybody in addiction needs recovery. But then you also have to want it, but that's still not enough. You have to be also willing to do whatever it takes to get it. That's the trifecta. And so if you're not coming to any of these modalities with at least a seedling of all three, your relapse rate's going to be very high, not because of the modality, but because of the place that you're at. That being said, you come to 12-step and you learn a very valuable process, because there's quite a bit of pain and suffering that you have to go through, and you really have to do the work, and it's over a period of time. So you're collecting a toolbox that you use to live life on life's terms, is what we call that in recovery. So we live a sustainable life no matter what happens, because essentially we only have control of about nothing that happens, except our reaction to it. And then you come to Ibogaine, and I think that the release is much better as far as how you feel, and much more quickly than like 12-step process or traditional rehab. But you go through this journey, and you might get shown a lot of things, or you might not, but you don't have the skill set to, integrate that into your life. So if you're going to come to Ibogaine and you want a high success rate, you need to be willing to do the integration work. You need you need an integration coach, somebody like myself. A regular therapist will not suffice. You have to understand this medicine. And I also think it still needs to be somebody that's actually been through addiction. That's a teaching in 12-step that only an addict can help an addict. And what I've seen in the professional world is that's 100% true. I don't care if you went to Harvard for addiction. If you haven't been through it, there's just a lack of relatability. And then you need to keep an open mind that you probably still need a recovery path. Like I would say, if you went through Ibogaine and were willing to go through 12-step process, then you'd see skyrocketing results and success rates. If you change your diet, you're going to up your success rates. If you pull in a mind body like a yoga practice, and you don't even have to go to 12-step after Ibogaine, you could devote yourself to the spiritual path of yoga or Buddhism or something like that. But you need, what I see lacking in the plant medicine world for addiction recovery is the lack of what's called principle-based living, which is what 12-step does provide. And it gives us a framework of principles that we're living by, so that when our traumatized personality emerges, we choose our principles over our personality. And that can be anything, So what I see the best success rates in is when we combine these modalities together. Each place says that they have the answer, and what I've seen is that each place has part of the answer, but because the different communities aren't connecting and working together, we're not seeing the larger picture here, which is that if we put all of these things together in some way, that's where we're going to start seeing success rates in the 80% rather than the 8%.
So if you were developing a place, what would it look like? An Ibogaine place with 12-step, with the nutritional, functional medicine, and then helping people build habits with a psycho-spiritual integration process and trauma-informed work?
Yes, it would be. And I would make sure to bring people that have studied extensively with Bwiti tradition, where the medicine comes from. I'm a big fan of doing a root bark psycho-spiritual in the traditional sense after the Western medical application of the Ibogaine, so we can put our soul back in the driver's seat of our body and our life. And then, people like Tommy Rosen at Recovery 2.0 have done a beautiful job of taking the 12 steps and kind of modernizing them and putting them through the lens of yoga. So I think it would be really great to, take the 12 steps and put them through the lens of Bwiti, because the teachings are so much the same. So that way it's, working really well with the medicine. But yeah, and after the medicine work is over, the medicine needs to be done just as it is, without any other modalities. But then the integration afterwards would be a structured daily routine, learning about nutrition, learning about how to use nature, learning about our circadian rhythm and the unbelievable importance of sleep for people in recovery. It would be being of service, because that's part of recovery is being of service in some way, learning about that. And yoga, breath work, mindfulness, all of the things that we need to really live as a lifestyle in recovery. And then I think that the Ibogaine clinics have some wisdom to learn from the traditional treatment model of the 30, 60, or 90-day stay, because you really need time.
That's pretty wild. Your program ideas. Is anybody putting this together?
It's been talked about, but it's hard because the financial aspect of it all is it's a lot.
Right, because you're talking about 30 days at least of a 12-step stay, 14 days at least of an Ibogaine stay, and then on top of that, the lifestyle integration practices.
Yeah, and so this is kind of futuristic talk, but it's where it needs to go, and I think someday somebody will figure that out. But for the meanwhile, if you can only access 7 days, know that this is all the things that you need to do to get home, and spend your preparation time setting some of this stuff up and go into this, making sure you're willing to do the work and that you are not coming to Ibogaine to cure your addiction in 7 days, because if you are, you're going to be very disappointed. If you're coming for an interruption, a reset, and that you are willing to do whatever you need to do to stay in recovery when you get home, and don't wait till you start feeling bad. Start when you want to do things in the world when you're feeling good, and then you're choosing from a good place. You can still do this without that model, but that's what needs to be done.
So when people are coming to you, are they feeling hopeful? Are they feeling stressed? The clients that you mostly have coming to you after an Ibogaine clinic or a 12-step program, are they completely overwhelmed?
Yeah, it depends on when they're coming. Like if they're coming before they're out of their addiction, they can feel very hopeless. But you can feel hopeless and hopeful at the same time. And typically I get people that have been in recovery for a little while and have done all the things, and they're still not feeling good. They're still anxious. They're still depressed. They're still craving. They may be still relapsing, and they're really feeling hopeless because they feel like they've tried everything that they've been told about. But then they also tell me that they feel incredibly hopeful when they meet me or read about the work that I do, because I'm talking about things that aren't being talked about, and it's addressing the things that aren't getting talked about, and so there's usually a mixture in there.
So how many clients are you working with at once? And also, one of the things we were talking about before, even when it comes to food, is the community of sitting with people. That's medicine. Do you create kind of a circle of people that can be part of an integration process together so they're not going through it alone?
I was working in a community where we had all of that going on. My work varies. I would, get hired to go travel with people to do private detoxes with the different things that I know about. And then oftentimes we have to go to places to where we can get those. But even when we do that, there's a container with people, and the staff is like a big family, and they all go through it together. I work with people virtually. I try to, I keep my one-on-one client load as small as I can, so that I ensure that I give everybody the quality and the attention that they deserve and require. I also have an online 3-month group coaching process, the Mind Body Reset, where we go through all of the diet and lifestyle, nervous system regulation. It's trauma informed, it's 12-step informed, it's psychedelic informed, and that's a one-on-one and group hybridized program online. And now what I'm working on at Humans Can Heal is a monthly group membership where we'll have weekly group calls, we'll have an integration circle. Each month we'll go into another holistic topic on, holistic addiction recovery, trauma, healing, and mental health. And so I'm really excited about that new project that I'm working on as well, for the sake of the community aspect.
Wow. You've done so much in this area. It must be so rewarding to help others through the process that was so hard and beautiful for you, but such a difficult lesson in life, the recovery path, and when you were in the throes of the alcohol addiction, so difficult.
Yeah, it makes it all worth it, It makes it all worth it. I don't regret anything because I get to help other people now. And that's the light of my life. That's the light of all of our lives in recovery, service.
Serving. Do you have like a plan for people? Do you make individual plans?
Yeah, when people come to me, it's all customized. So, it differs from going to see a Western doctor or a psychiatrist. And I'm a practitioner, I'm not a functional doctor. But you do an extensive health history. And then there's a 90-minute follow-up session to review everything. And then after all of that's done, then I create a customized protocol for the individual. And then we come back together for like another 90-minute session to go over all of it, because it's also important that I meet my client where they're at, because it's not supposed to add more stress. And then coaching sessions follow after that, either weekly or bi-weekly, to make sure the person's staying on track. And so each person's needs are going to be different depending on where they're at. I also have to, take into consideration the resources, time, and money that my clients have, and work within their resources, not mine. So I really put a lot of work and effort into each person's protocols. If we're talking about Ibogaine, to recognize that, if you're not feeling as perfect as you hoped for, that's okay. It's keeping you there for discipline. And if you feel perfect, don't just ride on that. Like, use that as a window of opportunity to start taking amazing care of yourself, so that feeling doesn't slip away. The biggest thing I see with people is that they just are like, oh, I'm all good, and they don't take care of themselves, and 2 months later they're miserable again. And that, these medicines can clear out the trauma and stuff, but it does not permanently regulate your nervous system, and your body needs resources to do the inner healing work. Takes an incredible amount of energy. So the self-care thing is paramount.
Really is. I mean, the body care, are you suggesting like hot and cold plunge? And
those are great. I mean, those are all the things I teach on. It's just going to be different for different people, right? Like yoga's amazing. Like, I can't think of a better thing to kill like 15 birds with one stone for people in recovery. And, also taking it gentle on ourselves. And, community, all of it's so needed.
Where are you living now?
I'm in Arcata, California, where we decriminalized entheogenic plants here. Yeah.
And how do you feel about the decriminalizing of Ibogaine?
I don't think it's going to happen. They took it off of the statewide measure in California that's going to be passing in 2025, or Iboga. So we are working hard here to decriminalize as many towns in my county as possible, so that we have access to Iboga legally, or at least not illegally. Right. I don't know how I feel about all of it, because I don't like what the industry is doing, and I don't like the pharmaceutical model. It's not meant to be put into that. But I trust that the medicine will decide if it will become legal or not. Yeah.
Now, as far as the industry, the Ibogaine industry, what are you seeing in the past 5 years? What are for example, what are the really pros of what you're seeing, and what concerns you? Anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think I see, the good thing is that the word's getting out more. I think it's getting a little bit less stigmatized. I think it's becoming a little bit more accessible for people, but it's unregulated. And as an insider, I've seen a tremendous amount of abuses, not just to clients, but to people working within the field amongst colleagues. There's abuse of power. There aren't any clear-cut ethical codes. There aren't any clear-cut processes for when things do happen. And I see the same problems in the Ibogaine industry as I did in 12-step, is that, most of us coming to this medicine were very sick. And just because we've been in 12-step community for a long time, or just because we've been in the Ibogaine community for a really long time, it doesn't really mean that we're healed. And I think that there's a tendency with Ibogaine, when you're in addiction, you can have really low self-esteem, and we're always looking outside of ourselves to get what we need, including the attention and the adoration of other people. And so one concern I see is that, people will go through Ibogaine treatment and immediately want to become a provider. And it's kind of a narcissistic thing, because then all of a sudden you're in a position of being a heroic savior, worthy of much praise and adoration. And that can mask a lot of unhealthy things. And sometimes those can come out and hurt other people. There's nowhere to go to get real clear-cut training. There's no streamlined like training. So we have like, you know, a lot of work ahead of us right now.
What do you think about someone who has addiction going to Gabon, Africa and doing Iboga?
The people that I've known that have gone over to Gabon for their addiction have done really well. I think that is probably the most ideal thing to do, but not everybody can do that. But you're there with the teachings, you're there with the community, you are there with all of the things that come along, because it's not the medicine, it's all of it. And so everybody I've known that's gone over to Gabon and spent some time, I've seen come back a changed person.
Wow. Did you go to Gabon and have medicine there?
Not yet.
Yeah.
I will be going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Do you have a date or a time?
In the summer.
I would like to go
the
too.
Summer. Yeah. I wanted to wait till my daughter was a little older, but she's a little older now. But I've gotten to spend a lot of time with people. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I would like to bring her.
So what's it like for you to be in recovery and doing the work that you're doing as a mom?
Well, it's really great in a lot of ways. I mean, I have time and location freedom, so I can be here for my daughter. One of the reasons I got into this work was to force me to stay doing my own work, because you have to do your own work if you're going to be doing this work for other people. And I'm still have my addictive tendencies and, you know, in there somewhere. And one of those tendencies for all of us is to kind of kick back on what we've already done. So one of the reasons I chose this work was to ensure that I stayed on my own path so that I would be the best mother I can be. And that's certainly served its purpose. You know, working on the front lines with people can be draining. I'll be honest, in all aspects of the addiction treatment industry, there's a lot of corruption. And there's some glass ceiling stuff for being a woman. So at some points it's been a little challenging too, you know, I won't lie about that. But overall it's been really good. And I think that it's helping in my daughter's prevention of this family legacy that I'm working so hard to break, because she's seeing what what I've done with my struggles, and she's learning a lot by watching me do what I do, you know.
So what's kind of your typical day like as far when it comes to recovery work for yourself, your own personal recovery care?
So first of all, I wake up from making sure I got a really good night's sleep. Sleep is the most important thing, and sleeping at night. And then I have a dedicated yoga practice. So I start my practice at 5 a.m. That's not required, but that's what I do. It's part of Kundalini lineage. And then after I'm done with my morning practice, I wake up and I make sure I connect with my daughter. But the biggest thing for me in recovery is that before I go out into my day, before I go out and get mixed up in the world, is that I check in with myself. And I put myself first, and I regulate myself. And I get into the neutral mind so I can get the downloads I need for the day. And then I use that as my guiding light throughout my day, you know. And then, of course, the food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, making sure I move my body every day. I get outside, I get sun, I get fresh air. I avoid unnecessary stress. And I just check in with myself throughout the day. And I have a toolbox that I can pull from depending on what I need in that moment, and I use it every day. But it's that morning,
Amazing.
It's that morning session that makes the difference.
Yeah, the night and the morning and the food and it all, the movement, the nature. It's so interesting because it's so simple in so many ways, but it's everything that kind of our Western culture has gotten away from. You know, just we're more isolated. Our food, we're not as close to our food sources. We're always running. I don't know when it started that people started eating in their car and always on the move. And, you know, it's so interesting when a lot of this is really coming back to the rhythms of life that we were meant to live.
It's a practice, and there's no coincidence of the poor lifestyle that our society is leading right now and the tremendous rise in addiction and mental health issues. And it is as simple as getting back into the rhythm of life, but it is a lifestyle choice and it's alternative, and you have to really have your boundaries up and not let the social norm get in the way of you taking care of yourself. And if you can do that, then you're going to be all good.
So I have a friend in recovery right now who will probably be getting out in a week. And it was a 12-step program. And I got a couple messages while she was there wanting information on Ibogaine. But I'm curious, like, what would your message be to somebody just coming out of treatment?
You're not cured. I don't care how much money you spend on treatment, you're not cured. And if you go back to doing what you were doing before, your life will be the same. So you have to go home and be willing to let everything you think you know go. If you had a bunch of friends that you were drinking with, you can't hang out with them. There's no negotiating these timeless wisdoms, whether you like 12-step or not. There are things that are in place that are told to people because they are true. You cannot go back to the people you were hanging out with. You cannot go back to an abusive marriage. You can't go back to a job that's working you 80 hours a week, night shift. You can't stop doing cocaine and start drinking. There's a lot of wisdom in abstinence. There's an argument for harm reduction, but that's a whole nother talk. And then, if you're doing 12-step and they say 90 meetings in 90 days, that's a minimum. I did 180 meetings in less than 90 days. Get a sponsor right away and just do what you're told, because guess what? If we knew how to live life and be okay, we would have already figured it out on our own. And to just put our ego aside and ask for help. And if you are called to Ibogaine or Iboga, like after treatment, that would be an ideal time to go because you've got tools to work with, right? And you can go and then all of a sudden you can feel better. But the tendency for us with addiction is we're always looking for an easier, softer way or a shortcut, and there isn't one. We have to face ourselves, we have to face our life, and we have to do the work. And whether it's 12-step or another process, most of us need very specific guidance. So the elements are, we need a community, we need a teaching, and we need a teacher that's gone before us, whatever that looks like. And that's step one. And then, as they say in recovery, the layers of the onion will be peeled back and more will be revealed. And we don't have to worry about anything than just today. So we want to keep it really simple, one step at a time. And don't worry about tomorrow, next week, a month from now. I promise you, if you choose recovery, if you choose sobriety, the 10,000 problems you think you have right now, if you just put your recovery first, the rest of it will take care of itself. And that depression, the regret that you can have of getting into early recovery and realizing how much time you've wasted in your life, you haven't. If you put your recovery first, if you put yourself first, like the Bwiti teach, that one goes in front of all of those zeros, and all of a sudden you're a millionaire, spiritually speaking, and you have wisdom beyond your years. And that can happen in quantum time in a matter of months. And all of a sudden you're like a leader in your community. So just trust that you don't have to know what it looks like. The money's going to be as scary. Your whole life is, and then the first year of recovery, there's going to be a series of challenges that are going to come your way, and they're going to seem unsurmountable, which is why it's so important to get these tools in place. But they're not there to show you that you should just keep drinking or using. It's there to build your resilience and your character. And you need these challenges the first year, and you can get through them. If you do what I just said, take it simple, take it one day, sometimes 1 hour at a time. And it's really important. It doesn't have to be God or religion, but we've got to find our higher self, the universe, wherever creation comes from, and keep connected to that, and that will take care of you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for that message. Where can people find you if they want to have your support in their process of recovery?
Yeah, you can go over to humanscanheal.com, and there's a contact form. You can fill that out and we can schedule a free call, and I will stay on the phone with you as long as we need to figure out what your next steps are. And if I'm not a good fit, I'm really good at putting people in the direction that is a good fit. So you just go over to humanscanheal.com. I'm also Humans Can Heal on Instagram and YouTube. And I'm so happy to hear from people. So please reach out if you feel called to do so.